Hello, world. Welcome to the Pocket Gamer Podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and our lioness of lifetime value, Miss Peggy Salz. Hello, Peggy. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you, Brian. I said lovely in your way, Brian. That's the best one yet, I have to say, because I do have quite a number of UA events behind me, and so excited. But I'm also excited because we have a different type of show. Rely on me to find a broad spectrum of eclectic guests, I think is what we'll say here, because I connected with our guest on LinkedIn, knew her before, but I've been watching her literally rise and shine. And she is the host and founder of Rise and Play. So, what could be better? And we're going to look at the human side of games development with someone who is, yeah, she brings her full self to work, I have to say. She's passionate about transforming leadership in game studios, and her expertise, again, that rise and shine and that rise and play. Well, I think her expertise shines when discussing how we really need to nurture and unlock the potential of individuals and teams in these creative and very, yeah, tech driven, but yet very human environments. She's a force. I'm prepared to be moved. Sophie Vo, welcome to our show. And I don't think I overpromised this time.
Thank you, Brian, Peggy. It's a pleasure to be on the other side of a microphone because, as you know, as well, I'm actually interviewing a lot of people. So I can sit back and relax today. And thanks a lot for the warm intro, Peggy. Put a big smile on my face and set me in the mood of sharing what I can share today.
It's lovely to have you here, and it's such a crucial issue. In the interest of disclosure, I have to say my partner is a coach and a facilitator. Does not do work in games, but has kind of listened with horror and bewilderment as I try to explain to her what's happening across the games industry in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So it's very timely, and I think we can all agree that it's a fairly unprecedented time globally, but the games industry has been struggling a bit. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, first of all? You come from a games development background, but then you've kind of pivoted to focus on leadership and that the human side of things. So can you give us a little flavour of your journey?
So I count this year 16 years of experience in game development. So I've played several roles. I was in production side, I was in product management, studio management, so stepping up in leadership roles, multiple companies as well. So I spent some time, my very first company was Gameloft at a peak time where mobile games, premium mobile games were the thing. Then moving to free to play, I spent some time at Wuga in Berlin, Germany. Spent a few years also at Rovio, built my own studio under Voodoo, first casual studio. Spent some time at PlayStation with a studio acquired, now called Neon Koi. It used to be Savage Games. So through that journey, little by little, moving from uh, product management production. So my motivation as in games has always been how can we create experiences that mark players, that impact the life of players, something you play, you experience, an emotion you feel, a realization. And I understood through the journey that while creating games, also the teams that were building those games were going through also their own journey and experience that is very emotional, transformative, and I found my passion over time was being more into building teams, unlocking the full potential of humans, and I get deeper, just deeper. You know, I have the analogy of the onion layers, so I get deeper, like unpeeling the onion layers to find what was my core, and it has always been about people more than games. And I realized that I would have much more value to bring, focusing and becoming more expertise, knowledge, insights from talking to a lot of other executives, entrepreneurs, and giving it back through my practice, through my learning, through my listening. And that's where I decided to pivot since end of last year around leadership in games because I saw a gap there as well.
Important pivot at this time. I'd like to follow up on your question, actually, Brian. It's the question of like, why now? And the pivot, because are they connected? Because, of course, the last months in gaming, the layoffs, and what happens when things shift is that people can also change and not always for the better. So maybe there's some sort of connection there between focusing on leadership at a time when, yeah, leadership and teams need that support.
So yes, the timing also plays a part here because companies, we all put our best face when times are good. So everyone can say we have a company with those values, transparency, we care for people. And I often see and say, you show your true character in times of crisis. And it's not pretty characters sometimes that come out when, especially last year, much more pressure on generating revenues, profit, dealing with layoff, which is a reality of operations. But the way it was handled was there were many cases of companies that have not handled well externally, internally. I know this also from talking to teams. So through my journey, and it was not just last year, because also I've been in organization where I was always like at some point a bit like found a ceiling in that growth of leadership. What is blocking the preventing the company to take responsibility, walk the talk? When we have a nice PR and the values on the wall, why this company is not practicing those values? And I realize it comes down to leaders of the company, and leaders, individual people who are in a position to lead others, but where it fails most of the time is not being able to lead themselves. So what I mean by that, the gap I've seen is, I've been in the position as well with a lot of pressure, building a team, delivering. I had to close also a studio. Um, and you can't blame anyone in that moment. You have to be with yourself, take responsibility, uncomfortable feelings of fear, identity, and ego. let's put it straight, ego.
Yeah.
And when you are actually surrendering to your fears and ego, this is where bad decisions happen, because you're not doing it out of awareness. You're doing out of ego. And so in my work of leadership, it's a lot about self-leadership. That's really the real work. Bringing self-awareness, that's the first step. And also, as you get awareness, how are you taking responsibility? Are you leading out of fears, or are you leading out of consciousness? So that was a lot of piece of my work with Rise and Place about conscious leadership. So it's about getting awareness. And I have seen that transformation in some leaders organization I've been part of, where I have been doing internal coaching, and now I do external coaching as an intervention. Just creating the awareness, it's a game changer for people, because they realize maybe they don't want to take that role, maybe they don't want to be the CEO of that company, maybe they don't want to take responsibility, maybe they hate conflicts and they don't want to give that bad news to people. But guess what? They accepted the role of responsibility where they have to do it. So it's overcoming that discomfort and taking responsibility. So a lot of the work around leadership is taking responsibility and self-awareness.
I could not agree more. It's one of the things that we kind of hear about from a lot of the guests on our show. We write about it on the website. So many studios are facing different issues these days, and the challenges facing the games industry just kind of grow and evolve at a huge rate. So it can be an incredibly challenging sector. But I have to ask and pick up on those insights, because in a lot of my experience, the people who are in leadership positions are there because of time spent, or because it's their company, or because they have the technical skills. But speaking from a UK perspective, we are very poor at providing any sort of leadership, training, or giving uh, our leaders the skills that they need. So, what are you seeing out there? What are the kind of the most common leadership challenges you run across when it comes to the games world?
I always, especially, I would say a team of co-founder, a team of leaders. First is really alignment, right? Clarity. So that's one of the challenges when you have multiple leaders that have to work together. If it can't have a good dialogue, communication, you have typically a company that have three visions. I've seen that multiple times. And so it's back to awareness. There's not the system in place or the tools in place for communication, the forums, or even the trust to be able to have that conversation. Like, are we still aligned? And if we're not, what are we doing, right? So I'd say that's the first one, where there's a lot of assumption around what it is to lead. Like, okay, I have the technical skills, I'm in charge. And as long as I keep doing what I do, it's all good. But it's a very different type of work, where it's very human oriented, because your goal is to work well with your team and create the best condition in your organization, environment, culture, values, systems for the team to execute the vision. That doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself, far from it. So that leads to the second challenge I see. It's a misunderstanding of the role and responsibility. It's confused with being a director, or a principal, an expert in doing something, and being a leader. Your value is in what others around you produce, not what you produce yourself. That's why it can be ego driven, because if you're in that position to do more and shine, you're in the wrong role, because by nature it's a role where you serve the interest of the company, of the people, through the company, because the people are the key, the core of the company. And if you're not dedicated to that, you're in the wrong role. So a lot of times also, from my conversation with leaders, I have them realize that's not the role they want to take. And this is a hard realization, because some, they know after they have to step out, step away, step down, however they tell themselves a story, but that's the most responsible thing to do.
So you've worked with a lot of companies, and also to Brian's point, it's not even just necessarily that we lack leadership training, but I've spoken with so many people in studios, and it was like, I'm the one here, so I become, I know the most. So they just say I'm the CFO or I'm the head of product. So people sort of, not only aren't they trained, but they're sort of moved into roles that they maybe didn't want in the first place. What are you seeing in the most surprising examples, maybe that you've identified in game studios, where there's a real gap between what management needs to be doing and what leaders are perhaps prepared to do?
Back to the last point, managers and leaders, it's actually two different roles, and that's very confused. It's not because you're a manager that you're a leader. So maybe I go back to the definition here, because I spent some time in workshop to even explain it, to bring awareness. Manager, they are managing system, they are managing a status quo, they are planning, budgeting, controlling resources, whatever the resources of the organization are. So you can say somebody technically skilled is a good manager, because you understand your field, you can manage resources, you optimize the outcome of what exists. Leadership is agents of change. So in games, we are in a permanent change and transition, because things are moving so fast. So we are actually in a position of management. We must learn how to lead through change, because it's there. And through change, it's different skills that are needed. It's influencing skills, communication skills, building a vision, right? So when you have the status quo and you're moving to somewhere else, you need to build the vision of the future and be able to communicate it and rally or gather people to move in the same direction together in a very agile way. That's what leadership is. But then the skills, like I said, is influencing, communicating, um, uniting, and it's very different skills than controlling, planning, budgeting. And influencing, people ask me, okay, how do you influence? This is where it's very, I would say, contextual, back to the culture of your company. You influence by convincing, you influence by creating transparency in your system, you influence by showing up who you are, building trust. And so you have to understand others, how humans work together, collaborate, so you can influence effectively. But that's where the main misunderstanding is. And I see a big emphasis in managing. We manage people, we create somewhere a vision, we write in the documentation, or we put a new goal, and then we hope everything goes for the best. But the leadership, it's a lot of spending time in influencing, gathering, making people move in the same direction.
You are influencing um, leadership styles. What are you seeing when you address these gaps? I mean, what have you observed? What are the biggest fears or the biggest egos at play here?
I'm reflecting on a workshop actually I gave also this year around the different leadership style. The thing is, we pick up on what we see, right? So, like we call it models and so on. And so, I also saw more in the industry, and that's where the conversation of representation of different style of leadership is so important. We see one that is, I don't know if it's proven, but it's one that has been a lot out there, is authoritative leadership style, right? You force, you're like a bit like bullying for, I mean, we hear the story around Musk. You see also big leaders, what we call leaders in the history. I was giving the joke like for French, like Napoleon, like it's still very ingrained in the French culture, that kind of a royal king that is on the pedestal and then, like decides of everything. So we have bad models out there. It's just off with what people expect, because leaders is always a response to what people expect and what motivates them, right? So it just doesn't work that much. It works for some company because at the end of the day, Tesla is moving a lot of people, not everyone. But when I look at games, there's a strong desire for teams, people to feel inspired at work, feel safe, and it's very valid, right? It's not for us to decide. No, we are not going to create safety here. It's like if people need this to be motivated, you need to adapt your leadership style with what people need. They need clarity, of course. They need trust, transparency, and that means that for leaders as well to define a style that is working towards that. So when you create transparency, this is a very difficult one because you will be exposed. So what is in the way for most leaders is fear. Is fear. What if others sees that I failed? What if others sees that I'm not good enough? So there's always a fear in leaders, and you see the ones who are not conscious, they do everything to protect themselves from the situation, and the ones who are more conscious, they just dive in and they say, I'm going to open feedback here. I'm going to put a ask me anything. You ask all the questions, I will answer in public because I'm not afraid to take responsibility. But the ones who are not, they're more afraid to appear looking bad, and they don't do, and then it creates more distrust.
You're absolutely right. The good leaders are the ones who not necessarily embrace it, but get used to the discomfort and get, can sit with it. And again, the point about putting your people first is absolutely, bang on. It's the happiest teams are the ones where they feel safe, not just protected, but encouraged and empowered. So let's kind of flip that and bring it back to you. So how do you, when you find those situations, how do you go in and how do you begin the whole coaching process to try and, turn them into agents of change?
So I come from product background, so I approach it like a product, right? So the same steps are analysis. So when I was in companies, also in some role, like my previous one from studio acquired by PlayStation, it was a period of analysis. So I sit down with people. I do have one-on-one with everyone. Listen, I'm not here to give my message. I'm just here to listen. I collect, I analyze qualitative feedback, quantitative. So I do also a survey, anonymous, to collect all the data. And I present this to us as a leadership team. That's the result. So whatever the goal we want people to perform this way, we want people to trust. It doesn't matter what we want. It's like we have to accept what it is today. So I start with that, and then it's the reality check. It's like, why is this? Why do we have people who don't feel safe? Why do we have people who have no idea what they're supposed to do this week or this month? Well, no one will take responsibility but us, so we have to start to work on that. So then we identify what are the patterns. So it's very methodical in the end. No emotional strings. It's not like, okay, we feel like it's this. No, it's we have analyzed, we see the problems, and how are we addressing as a leadership. So lack of clarity, what does that mean? So should we start to do all hands maybe meetings where we present the strategy on a regular basis so everyone is aware and aligned with the vision of a direction? We don't have safety. Why is this? So then listening more to people, okay, there's not a safe environment to give feedback. Every time we give feedback, it's pushback, or we gaslighted. And then why is who's gaslighting? Is it the leaders? Okay, then everyone in the leadership team, we get training to know how to receive feedback. So like then we address very methodically all the problems. So that's how I work. And so people who have worked with me have really appreciated my structure and my analysis because it's not opinion. And so where it is also works with the leaders, it's not a judgment from me. I'm not coming here to say you were bad, you're a bad person. It's just a result. Like, are you taking responsibility with this role? If you don't want, then find someone else to find this role and take that responsibility. But no one else will do this but you. right? So they can't get away from the conversation because everything is very logical. So I use more logic and not make it about people, but more of a system. What is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And what solution are we taking? You don't have the skills, no problem, no judgment. We go into training or you get a coach.
That's fantastic. And do you, without naming names, obviously, do you have any examples where you've had that breakthrough, or you've found somebody that you've reached, or that's just given you joy?
I think the biggest moment of joy for me in different. I was in either in my studio I was building at Voodoo or even the previous one. Uh, it's the breakthrough when people have self-awareness and they're finally removing that mask. I can feel the freedom because they were running on a narrative for themselves. I'm a high performer, I'm perfect, like there's also the perfectionism pattern, and then you can see the pressure they put on themselves and they can't get out of it. But because I build the trust environment, safety of conversation, when I see them for their quality, I see them also for the fears, and they can be for themselves. It's like it's it's liberating to not have to be that person. So when they have redefined for themselves, I don't have to be that perfect person. And it's coming deep in childhood. So some of them they have to complement, whatever like therapy or introspection. It never it never conscious. It's not something like as an adult or emotionally mature person you have to be. So when they realize it's not an identity I need to continue with, it's not something that I am or I must be, I can see that, and then they liberate themselves, and that's where they have a more balanced life. They spend less time at work, so they help more the company, and they are more, relaxed. This is the moment of joy because I see suffering. I see suffering in most leaders I work with. They're not happy either, and then everyone is suffering around.
What about the other direction? Because that's when people see that there's a problem. They realize it and then they embrace it. And as you said, there's that moment where they sort of let go and they understand that they don't have to be the company. But then, and I'm sure you've experienced it too, Brian, there are those out there who love the power that they have, or if they don't love the power they have, their VCs, their partners, their investors are pushing them into that persona. What do you do in that case? I mean, how do you help, or what's your advice to a studio where it's like, how do you rein in the ego? How do you rein in the investors? How do you keep some human element and some control in this situation?
Of course, there's will always be the external pressure wherever it comes from VCs, from expectation of society, players. So VC is just an example where it's much more concrete because it's very monetary. And I've seen this is where the leadership is really at hard stress test because it takes courage to say no. At the end of the day, it's your company. VCs can push in a direction, but I've seen founders exemplary to say, I if you want me still around in the way I want to run the company, those are my terms. So I always then work with leaders to ask what are they afraid of if they say no? What is it? What is at stake for them? Is it like the fear that I don't know they will lose the companies? But is that true? Will it really happen? So it's like going through the fears and having that fear talk to really get to the end of it. Is that true? But most of the time, I would say it's really having the courage to stand for what you believe and say no, and also accepting the worst outcome, whatever the worst outcome is. Like if there's no point for me to continue this company if I don't believe in what I'm doing, I'm not doing it for the right reason. So what's the point of all of this if you say yes to VCs for whatever whatever are the expectation, because you're the wrong person to run it. So maybe the good decision there is also get out of it. So I always push the thinking further instead of staying in paralysis of the fear. I will just keep doing what others expect of me. But then they hit a wall, right? So usually it's when they really hit a hard wall that they come to realize something's not working. But I'm more proactive there in the conversation to ask, what will happen really if you allow yourself to say no or take a stand. So it's again working on internal fears. And I wanted to say really that we all have our fears. It's very human. But the where is unfair, I would say unfair, you are taking a position of responsibility and leadership, you will be more exposed with your fear. So are you willing to go through that journey where you have to work on yourself to overcome your fears, because that's the journey, that's the right journey to go for, to be conscious leader, to do the right thing. And not everyone is geared for that. Some don't want to get there, and I understand, but then don't take the role. But that's the most responsible thing to do.
This is fantastic, Sophie, and I think one of the things that we tend to find in the games world is that the focus on the technical processes, the delivery, the production, is all consuming, and so the human element is lost. So your approach on coming in and kind of optimizing and improving the process, and building upon that kind of technical expertise, um, will help the studio, and obviously one of the outcomes could be helping them improve their games. So, do you have any sort of examples, any sort of pieces of advice you can offer to our listeners about, you know, points where you've gone into a studio and helped to achieve that success?
Of course, the angle of humans is not for the sake of focusing on human, because something we forget: humans that are the heart of creation. With no people, you have no company, you have no games. That's just pretty straightforward. So we tend to forget about that sometimes, but I mean that's at the end of the day the core. So for me, around the human approach is really about building the right system that make people use the best of potential they have in themselves to create. And I break it down really in few things. So one is really, again, the foundation is really the leadership. Like, are we clear about the direction where we're going? Why? What's the vision? What are our goals? What are our priorities? I think that's the minimum to provide a team so they know where they're going and they can be autonomous in their work. So that's where efficiency is. So contrary to management, you manage the task, you manage everything that the team has to do, but they don't have a full picture, they don't understand, they just execute. This is an efficient way of working, where we're not in a factory age where you just produce, right? You use your intelligence, your creativity, your inspiration. So around making games, it's a lot of cognitive creativity. And so you, as a system, an organization, you gain more by giving autonomy for people, creating the frame. Why are we here? Where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? Even the goals. What are the rules of the game? How are we playing together as a team? What are the rules? We call it values. So how do we communicate with each other? How do we make decisions here? How do we debate? How do we solve a conflict? How do we ship something? How do we decide on which features is important? So when you have created those rules of the game, everyone can play at their best. And that's where efficiency is really through human systems, rather than controlling the process, controlling, I don't know, the outcome, controlling a person. It's a very inefficient way, even from a management point of view, for the outcome. And I've seen the best teams. I saw it also with the studio I built with this principle. The output was 10x by me planting the seeds, creating the right system, and then I could be out of it, and the wheel was in motion. So you have the right people with the motivation, the right skills, and they produce, they will do the thing. That's something that we tend to forget. So it's spending time more on the environment, the system, than controlling individuals.
I'm thinking about that because that ties in with the other dynamic we're seeing, which is that the teams themselves, to your point, they're bringing in all the different talents. We're talking about product and marketing and engineering and creative. We talk about my favorite topic that I want to cover at some point as well, Brian: democratizing access to the data actually creates a better company and a better game, because again, it's that whole idea of being transparent. So even being transparent about the data that you're using to forecast your goals. You can't say, oh, we missed the quarterly goal, if everyone isn't clear on what that really is. So it's really about all of that at all levels, and that's the way gaming studios are moving right now. And another thing that's happening, and we'll have a show about this as well, Brian. I'm always thinking about these things, is about reinventing yourself, because everything is changing, and your coaching itself, right, Sophie, is about unlocking your hidden potential, unlocking your talent, bringing the most out of that, not just in a team, but in yourself. And I'd just love to hear what you can share around how people can reinvent themselves, particularly at this time where they may have been in UA, but through a layoff, they're no longer doing that. They're not doing media buying. They have to find another role in the company. Any thoughts or any smart advice on what an individual can do to change themselves and change their journey?
So same approach here. I have a very product approach, and I have been coaching actually people in a transition of career after a layoff or sometimes leaving. So I'm very familiar with that process. So what we do as a first step is analyze 360 review. We analyze the whole past, sometimes 15 years, 10 years of all the roles, the up and downs, and what were the commonalities, the patterns where the person was the happiest, the most energized, like the fullest version of themselves, and the worst time where they were drained, they were stressed, they were not themselves. So before you change, you have to understand who you are first. So there's a lot of time spent into analyzing. So something we don't do enough is because it's not intuitive. It's taking time aside to reflect, to journal. So with leaders, I work a lot to say, dedicate some white space. This is time for yourself. It is good time spent. You need a strategic time. So I have done this for myself, and that's what also I work with in my coaching. And then people discover a few things about them, and then it's like, well, it hasn't been always about UA for me. Actually, I see a common pattern where I love to grow things. I love to bring them 0 to 1. It's like, okay, interesting. If we start from a definition, or 1 to 2, like the scale, the big numbers, what else can you do then? If it's like, forget about UA for a moment, what else can you do? And then they start to see options. If I want to, because at the core, this is the activity, not just the field. And then they start to see, well, maybe I can help advise other companies to bring 1 to 2, or maybe I can apply my game knowledge to other companies like tech, consumer apps. And so they start to see options. So in the process of reinventing yourself, it's about understanding what makes you you, what you're good at, what you have energy and joy, and how can you translate that in other fields. And then you start to zoom out, right? Instead of being very narrow and thinking this is the only way for me to exist. And it's also a very beautiful transformative process to see people allowing themselves to see bigger. That's how also I moved to coaching, because before I was like, I can only make games for these games, I'm all about that. But like I said, peeling the layers of the onion, like, no, it has never been just about that. And then I can do much more than starting from the core.
That makes a huge amount of sense, and it chimes for me because I know so many people who see their role within games as fixed. I am a programmer. I will always be a programmer, and more so that games is their whole world. They never look beyond. So, I'm really interested in finding out from your work in games. Are you now looking kind of beyond as the games ecosystem kind of converges with so many other areas? You mentioned tech, film, screen animation, high end TV, virtual production. Are you looking beyond the sort of the, shall we say, the confines of the games market into sort of the wider world?
Yes, so I've been also doing that process for myself, where so I've been really deep into the leadership topic and human, and it doesn't apply only to games, right? We don't have just humans in games, but my experience and my network is in games. So I was really trying to put together like those different circles and what is the intersection. And so right now I'm building a coaching product called Olivia. I will announce it soon this summer
Hmm.
publicly. And it's taking all my insights, learning of leadership, but making it scalable to empower individuals to do some self-guided coaching for themselves in a reasonable
Okay.
budget. And where it's interesting, like where is game fitting into that? I use with my co-founder. We're both game executive. Our game knowledge, or how to create an engaging product, something playful, something fun to engage with, into a consumer app. As we see some game executive moving to that, so we are bringing our game knowledge to build a leadership coaching product, and we are distributing first in the gaming industry because that's where our network is. So we started to work on it 3 months ago. We have MVP ready, we have monetization ready, and we have a first customer already. And all of that bootstrapped with no VCs, So I found my path to build something I really care about
Great.
and where I was not stuck financially. Yeah.
Uh, that's
That's fantastic. Congratulations,
Congratulations,
Sophie.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've got it
Thank you.
here. It's your new chapter that you are
Yes.
writing. That's exciting. And congratulations.
Mm. Yeah. So that's an example, where you can go beyond. And it was a process for me to think, how can I still be in games without being games? It was a bit of a grieving process where I could say, oh, I don't want to leave games, but I'm never leaving games. I help people in games.
It can sometimes feel like there's no escape. I've stepped out into the wider world of tech and journalism and education, skills and development, and yeah, games keeps drawing me back in. It is a weirdly compelling and wonderful sort of community of people. So I'm delighted. We can't wait to hear more about Olivia and potentially get you back on the podcast to tell us more once you're up and running.
Thank you very much. I'd love to share more about it and distribute it with the world, because I believe in the mission, everyone deserves a coach. Not only people who have a lot of money and are in executive roles, and to find their inner truth. To have a more serene life professionally.
You can't always have the answer, but if you do figure out the question, it's like in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you know the question, then the answer makes sense. Let's talk about those questions. Let's have 3 rapid fire questions that we should be asking ourselves that maybe we don't even know we should be asking ourselves. And when we ask ourselves, we will start on this journey. And maybe you'll also be ready to work with you. What would those questions be?
Like really emerging for me, it's around emotional management, because we talked a lot about
Okay.
the failure of managing our emotions in leadership, like fears,
Mhm.
stress. So a lot of times we feel and we act, well, we react, right? So the question anyone can ask themselves, whether you're in leadership role or not, but to have more of that serenity, like feel first. When you feel like in your body, a feeling is not in the head. We are thinking our emotions, but actually we are feeling them in our body. What am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? That's the first question. When you are overwhelmed, something is not right.
Mm,
To give an example, anger is very located in the chest. It's like tension, contraction.
mhm,
Fear is in the guts, the belly. Sadness is more in the pain of the chest, like in your heart. So you can locate your emotions. What am I feeling? And as you identify the emotion, why am I feeling this way? Emotions always tell you something.
mhm,
If you're angry, it's because your boundaries were crossed. Somebody stepped on your boundaries like really hard. You couldn't defend yourself and you are really upset. And it built resentment. It turned into resentment. So when you understand anger, for example, you know how to act. Like you need to set back your boundaries. Sadness also has a meaning. It's a feeling of loss. And fear is a feeling of not knowing what's going to come. So then you can actually work on that. What it needs to be known for me, so
mhm,
I'm not feeling fear. So the second question, after why are you feeling this way, is after you understand why you're feeling this way, what will you do? What is the action you'll take after you understand why you're feeling that feeling? So the three question: what am I feeling right now?
mhm.
Second, why am I feeling that feeling? So what is behind that feeling? And once I understand that, what will I do?
So, Sophie, you've brought some incredible advice. This is an area I know that the games industry struggles with. I know a lot of people personally who have really found the sort of the challenges of leadership, overwhelming, and in some cases life changing. So, I think this is an area we need to talk about more. And your whole approach, I think, has been really refreshing. And I'm fairly sure our listeners are going to have an awful lot to take away. So, thank you for that. Now, before you go, something completely different. We ask all of our guests, we bring it right back into the heart of games. And we're going to ask you, what game are you playing right now when you're not bringing joy to people's lives, simplifying? Um, what are you playing? And then what's brought you the most joy? What's your favourite game of all time?
Such a difficult question. I have so many games I love to play. But a game I've been playing, but I pause it a bit, is Baldur's Gate. But this is a kind of experience where I can go really deep. It's very creative. It's very like RPG. Like I'm a completionist, so I love spending time on that type of game. So still like
Beautiful.
the
Hmm.
game for me this year. Best game all times. I go back to my RPG love is Final Fantasy VII. So then it reveals also which generation I'm part of, because it's like you have that was high poly like graphics, like 3D that is almost laughable, but it's kind of cute. So it was the first 3D game RPG game from Final Fantasy. But it was such a deep story. I was really in it, and it was almost like a self journey for me because I could recognize myself so much in the journey of a game, a hero, the characters. So it really marked me, and this is where I realized I want to work on things that will move you this way as you experience, the media, the thing that teaches you something very deep about yourself. And so I'm still on that journey, So that game did that to me, and I hope like to create more products that will do the same. Not maybe a game, but products that will move you in a way that you didn't know about yourself.
A beautiful
Yeah.
answer, deep and meaningful and personal. So that couldn't be more perfect. And a big change from all the guys we get who come on and say football manager, which happens a lot.
Wow,
That's also
not my
It's a
game.
great game.
something. They're being true to themselves, Brian. It's all good.
There are no wrong answers,
No,
Peggy, but I really appreciate the thought and feeling that you brought into that, Sophie. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I could honestly talk to you all day, but sadly we're going to have to bring things to a halt and let you go. But we will absolutely ask you back, and we will absolutely, you know, hope to hear more about
yeah,
Olivia as things progress.
absolutely.
And thank you for giving us the world exclusive.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's my first announcement about it, right? So I was like holding. It's like, okay, I need to jump in the washer. I'm going to do it at this episode. So thanks for the opportunity.
It's lovely because when I reached out to you, I didn't know that, and we have that as a bonus. It all goes around in a circle. And as I said at the beginning, it was going to be a moving show. It has been, but it's also moved us forward, I think, on our own personal journeys. Speaking here for my listeners, it has been valuable, it has been a joy, and it has been fun. So thank you, Sophie.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very fun for me as well. Thank you.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms. So subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future.